On this episode of Faith versus Culture, we're talking about the dangers of social media and how parents can protect their kids. That's coming up.
Having sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins.
There are problems of sin and habit that cannot be solved outside the person of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Well, welcome to this week's episode of Faith versus Culture. I'm Trey Goins-Phillips, and I'm joined by my colleague at CBN Digital, Billy Hallowell. Billy, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. You know, it's great to have these conversations, as tough as it is to talk about the dangers of social media. It's become so ubiquitous that we kind of have to talk about it. We can't really ignore it anymore. It's something that's permeating all of our lives. So I'm glad we're taking some time to talk about it. And I want to welcome in Lynna Nealon. She's the Vice President of Corporate Advocacy for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. It's kind of a mouthful, but Lynna, I'm glad to have you with us. How are you?
Good. I'm so glad to be with you.
You know, this is like I said to Billy, such an important topic and something that we need to be talking about. And just this past week, there was a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee about the dangers of social media, about a lack of accountability for several social media organizations, among which Facebook and Instagram's parent company, Meta. And there was even a new whistleblower who came forward and talked about the fact that even his own daughter was targeted by predators on social media. Could you talk a little bit about the latest, about what's happening in these lawsuits and in these allegations against social media platforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So this latest hearing that brought, I think, a very compelling witness, and like, as you said, his own daughter alerted him to some of the things that were happening on Instagram. And he was an engineer for Meta for many years and then was brought on as a consultant. And what was unveiled through these hearings in the Wall Street Journal article, I think was the impetus for bringing him in as a witness, was that he alerted Mark Zuckerberg and Sandberg 2 years ago of the sexual exploitation and abuse that his own research was uncovering. So, for example, he found that 1 in 3 kids had experienced sexual advances on Instagram. Often that comes in the form of being sent nude images, oftentimes by adults, adults sending it to kids. 1 in 8 had experienced unwanted sexual advances within a week of him conducting research. And this very much aligns with what we've known about Meta for years from other research, from other whistleblowers, Frances Haugen 2 years ago, almost to the day, and our own research and what we hear from survivors. So this hearing, again, it was in particular compelling because it was a whistleblower, but sadly what he shared is nothing new. We know these harms happen on Instagram and Meta, and not only have been happening, but are unfortunately escalating.
Well, I have to ask you, I think the natural question, hearing you talk about whistleblowers, plural, you would think, well, one whistleblower should be enough, right? If somebody comes forward and says, this is what's going on, the assumption would be that these companies would clean up their act, fix it immediately. Why does it feel as though perhaps they've dragged their feet? They haven't taken the actions that you would say are needed to alleviate and prevent this sort of behavior on these platforms.
Yeah, it is infuriating. So again, 2 years ago, Meta executives were brought in. I think 2 executives testified in front of Congress. There's a lot of righteous anger in Congress demanding that Meta make changes. And in fact, what did they do? Within a few months, they had a rebranding. That was when they rebranded to Meta. Instead of actually making the changes that Frances Haugen unveiled again, that Meta knew that they were harming teens. They knew that they were reducing and affecting the mental health of 1 in 3 girls. They didn't make significant changes. Their first response was parental controls that literally had no teeth. So what are they doing? Instead of making the platform safer for kids, they're putting the burden on parents. Now, of course, parents need to be involved in their kids' online safety, but they're basically washing their hands and also putting more guilt on parents to fight a losing battle. The platform itself is dangerous by design. They have created tools because they are profitable, and you asked why they don't change, because of profit. They've create these tools that actually make predators able to connect with kids in easier ways. So they're not making changes because it's more profitable not to. They have not been held accountable. And again, they're getting away with it. So why would they make changes? But we're hopeful that this is the Congress that really is going to bring forward a host of bills, pass a bunch of bills. We think they're going to be the Child Protection Congress because we cannot wait any longer because these companies are not doing what they should. They are not doing the bare minimum to protect kids online.
I think this is such a tricky issue because really everything kind of gets lumped into. Obviously, this is a moral issue. It can be a legal issue, even a political issue, as we're seeing with lawmakers on different sides of the aisle. Now, one good thing that we talked about, Lena, even before we started recording, is the fact that there is a bipartisan desire to see this addressed. But I think a question that I've had is, what's the balance? At what point does the damage done by social media fall to the one using it? And when does it fall to the one providing it, as in Meta not putting in, or any platform, Twitter or X, Meta, whatever it is, not putting in enough safeguards? Where does the responsibility lie? Is it fully on these social media platforms? Is it fully on parents and users, or is the line somewhere in between?
That's a great question. We really do have to look at our past history. Cars, for example. In the beginning, they came with no seatbelts, no airbags, brakes that maybe worked, maybe didn't. And it took oversight and regulation to make the cars as safe as possible from the get-go. And right now, what's happening is that social media is giving a product, a widely used product that, of course, has its benefits, but it does not have the seatbelts, the airbags, and the brakes in place. And they expect parents to try to figure out how to do all of that, again, on a product that is inherently dangerous. So they have the resources, they have the power to give a product that is safe by its very design. And that is what we want from these platforms. There's legislation right now, Kids Online Safety Act, that has passed judiciary. We hope that it will come to fruition, that is basically putting those bare minimum safety standards in place. And then I think throughout the product, of course, they constantly have to be testing and assessing the risk to young people, to all their users, but especially young people, and prioritize that over profit. Now, we understand they're companies, they want to make profit, but they can't do it at the expense of the user. And then, yes, of course, parents need to be involved. They need to understand how their kids are using social media. Kids need to be taught how to use it responsibly. But right now, they are fighting a losing battle. I understand these platforms. I am on there posing as a young person, as a 13, 14, 15-year-old. I am in these platforms day in, day out, and I can barely keep up with all the changes that are happening, trying to stem predators accessing me, trying to prevent pornography exposure and other harmful content. It is a losing battle. So yes, it's a balance, but right now the balance is completely skewed.
What do you say to parents who are giving unfettered access to their kids? Because that is, there's a real battle here. There are so many kids. I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I will tell you that my 11-year-old, I can prevent her from being on all of these platforms, which I do, but she goes to school and all of her friends are on Facebook, they're on the bus, they're on Instagram, they're showing each other. What do you say to those parents who really have not done anything to stem social media usage?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I think a lot of parents, it's just not knowing, right? Or it's willful ignorance. And we also hear a lot, and it's the phrase that gives me most concern is "not my child." And we unfortunately are living in a world where predator access, at various levels, and exposure to harmful content is a when, not an if. So any responsible parent in this digital age where children's lives are online, right, must do their research, do their homework, and understand the very grave risks that affect every child, every household, doesn't matter what demographic, whether they're in private school, public school, homeschool. We've seen it all, and the risks are very real. And we don't want to come to this from a fear-based angle, but there does need to be this recognition that it is a dire situation. And as you said, you might be talking to your child and putting all the protections in place that you have available in your home. But it is so important to recognize that, yes, they are going to go to somebody else's home. We have seen countless instances of predator and pornography exposure through school-issued devices. So you have to have those conversations often and truly know the world that your kids are in.
Yeah. I think it's overwhelming if you just take all this information and you don't have the practical tools. So on the other side of the break, we're going to talk about some practical steps we can all take to protect ourselves and to safeguard our kids. So stick with us and we'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Faith versus Culture. We're joined by Billy Hallowell and Lynna Nealon. Lynna, just before the break, you were talking about some of your own experience of having posed as a teenager on these social media platforms. And so you've really been exposed to the dark underbelly of what's actually happening, unfortunately, on many of these social media apps. So if you could talk a little bit about that experience for us.
Sure. It is quite horrifying, the things that I have seen and the people who have reached out to me, sometimes within seconds. I will not even have a picture up. I will enter a platform and I'm on the most popular, Meta, all the Meta platforms, Instagram, Discord, and other maybe lesser known ones like Kik, to collect research and evidence that we give to policymakers and the corporations themselves. And very quickly we'll have and our other researchers will be approached by adults and we'll make it very clear that we are teenagers. I'm in high school, or I'm cheerleading for my sophomore team. And almost immediately we're asked for pictures, and they quickly escalate to asking for, nude images, for example. The amount of child sex abuse material, which is the more appropriate term for child pornography, we have found on surface level. This is not deep web. This is on chats, indirect messaging, on platforms like Discord. We can see the indicators, and we have been exposed to child sex abuse material, which of course we report immediately, but it is not hidden. It is where your children are. And again, pornography exposure. There was a UK study that showed that about 33% of kids who had been exposed to pornography were exposed on Snapchat and Instagram. So not Pornhub, Snapchat, and Instagram, even though they technically don't even allow pornography or nudity, but it took them years to remove the Pornhub channel off of Instagram, right, where kids are accessing it. So these are things that I see on a weekly basis. This is not dark web or somewhere where you have to look for it. It is coming at you, and it is coming at your children.
There's so many different platforms out there, as you mentioned, and obviously we talked a lot about Meta. What are maybe the top two most concerning platforms, so parents understand? Obviously they need to be on top of all of it, but what are the ones they really need to have deep concerns about?
So Instagram and Snapchat are the ones that are most consistently ranked for top for sextortion, which is a type of blackmail that we're seeing a very concerning increase, to the point where FBI is issuing warnings consistently, mostly targeting young boys. Snapchat and Instagram, again, top for recruitment for sex trafficking and the actual buying and selling of young people. They're also the top for pornography exposure. So when we talk to, I think this has been consistent with our own experience. And then when we talk to law enforcement and survivors, I always ask them, what do you think are the worst platforms? And it's Snapchat and Instagram consistently. Another one that we really do want to warn parents about is Discord. Discord is a very popular kind of chat, text, video chatting app that used to be mostly used with gamers, but became very popular during COVID. And we're seeing an incredible amount of again, child sex abuse material trading. That seems to be a very popular place where predators will meet kids and then move them to more discreet, more private apps like Snapchat. So that's one that we want to raise the alarm. And, I have to say, we work with a lot of these companies and they have made changes, but the changes are not substantive enough. And even with the changes, we are still seeing an escalation in these types of abuses. So those are the ones that really we want to make sure that parents are aware of and are digging into the risks a little bit more before they allow their kids on there.
Yeah, I think taking in all this information, it can be kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant. You're like, I don't really know now what I'm supposed to do as a parent. What are some maybe good boundaries, I guess, that parents can set up to protect their kids as best they can?
Sure. Well, first, parents really need to understand their children, right? And first, you need to understand you're not even supposed to be on social media until you're 13. We see way too many kids, even age 9, 10, 11, on TikTok and Snapchat. They shouldn't be on there. And then really know your child and their maturity levels. There are great resources, filters on routers. There's software like Bark, which is one of our favorite, and Canopy that can monitor social media and send alerts to parents. Protect Young Eyes is a really great resource. You can actually go and look at devices and apps, and will show you how to put on the parental controls if they exist, on the various social media platforms. So use the tech tools that are available. They are there. Now, of course, they're not foolproof. So you have to be talking to your children early and often about these issues. Everything from when they're starting the potty train, using anatomically correct terms actually is a sign to predators that a parent is involved and engaging their child in conversations and warning them about potential sexual abuse and exploitation. Again, there are resources out there to have age-appropriate conversations with kids. Defend Young Minds has a great book, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Again, how to talk to your 3, 4, 5-year-old about pornography. I know it sounds crazy, but you have to, because again, they may go to school, they may go to a friend's house. And then, know the platforms that you're on, that your kids are on, go on them, sit with them, friend them on the social media. That again, that's not foolproof. Kids create fake accounts, but you get a really good sense of what is happening on these platforms and the dangers in order to have the conversations with your kids, and really try to build that trust with your child so that they would come to you if they are in a situation like sextortion, which again, we're seeing more and more of. And if you feel like, I always advise to give have some other trusted adults that you talk to your kid and you talk to that adult and say, if something happens, and you feel like you can't come to mom and dad, go to this person so that they can also help you out. And then it's really important. One of the things I do whenever we have new friends who come to our house or we go to someone's house, I actually ask, do you have guns in the home? And are they locked up and safe? And will my child have any access to screens? And that opens up a conversation and helps inform other parents. And then it can also help you ensure that your child isn't going to be, on an older sibling's smartphone or a computer unsupervised. And then know the signs, getting, changes in mood and behavior, kind of pulling away from the family or friends. If you're seeing that they're getting have gifts or have obtaining more material goods, that's often a sign of grooming, because a predator might be sending them money, using those types of incentives to form the relationships. So again, know your child, search the resources. Our National Center on Sexual Exploitation has a lot of great resources for parents, but they do exist. Parents are not alone. You just have to put the time into it for your children. And if you're not educating them, the pornography industry will be. I guarantee it.
Yeah, as you said, there's so much here to discuss, and we could go down so many different kind of rabbit trails and talking about this all important topic. But thank you so much, Lynna Nealon from the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, for taking some time to talk with us, and stick with us for the rest of the episode of Faith versus Culture. We'll be back in a minute. Well, welcome back to Faith versus Culture. I'm joined by my CBN Digital colleague, Billy Hallowell. Billy, that was a great conversation with Lynna, but also I think kind of overwhelming. There's so much stuff going on social media, but I think important to have the conversation nonetheless. So what was your takeaway from that conversation with Lynna?
Yeah, I think as a parent, thinking through all the different attributes of this and all the different elements, like you were just saying, I mean, she brought up Roblox. Roblox is a gaming platform that a lot of kids love to be on. There's a chat there too. And so you think, oh my gosh, even the places you think might be safe, they very well may not be. And so just, like you said, it's like whack-a-mole, but making sure we're on top of our kids. At the end of the day, I know there are a lot of people in this discussion who will say it's all on the parents, they have to figure it out. But I would remind people, yes, that is true to a degree. But when you send your kids out into the world to a friend's house, as she was saying, other kids have access and they are going to show your kid things. And so we have to be better about preparing our kids, helping them understand the challenges that are ahead, which, years ago we didn't have these issues. So things are a lot different.
Yeah, well, and I think another thing to remember too is, as Christians, we know that there's an absolute moral standard that's found in Scripture, and obviously, I think it is difficult, like you're saying, to figure out that balance. How much responsibility is on me, and how much responsibility is on these corporations and these social media companies? But you would hope that they would also have a moral compass, right? The people leading these organizations would have a moral compass, and that would be the baseline. Unfortunately, the baseline more often than not is how much money can I make, rather than what safeguards I can put in place that are actually going to protect people from really dangerous things. That should be the concern, is how can I look out for other image bearers of Christ and say, this is going to happen, so I'm going to put in the barriers that I can to make sure that it doesn't happen, so that human beings and their dignity is protected. But unfortunately, that's not how our broken world always operates. So I think it does fall on parents to take responsibility when they can, but also, as Lena was saying, advocate like her organization does on Capitol Hill to DC, talking to representatives, and then holding these corporations' feet to the fire over what rules can you put in place that make this better, not just for you or for us, but for everybody. Because like we've all said, the internet and technology and social media is kind of ubiquitous. It's not going away. So it's critical, I think, we have a healthy understanding of the good that's there, but also the dark side that's there too. So important conversation, and we will be back in just a couple of minutes to wrap up this episode of Faith versus Culture. Stick with us. Well, welcome back to this episode of Faith versus Culture. Thank you so much for joining us for this all-important conversation. That is all we have time for on this week's episode. If you haven't already, go to cbnnews.com, subscribe to our newsletter. Don't miss an episode of the show, and of course, get all your news from a Christian perspective. For now, that's it. We'll be back next week. God bless you.